But is there any one of us so dead and so lacking in concern about our people, about our own selves, about our destiny and what's going to happen to us, that we're not concerned with things like that? My friends, many of the prophecies of the Bible written 1,900 years ago, 2,500 years ago, 3,500 years ago, many of those prophecies have been amazingly fulfilled in the most startling manner. Let me just give you one little example. There is one prophecy concerning the Jewish people, that they were to be invaded, and that they were to be conquered and driven out of their own land, and that they would be punished for a period of 2,520 years. Now, putting that together with other prophecies, exactly 2,520 years from the time that they were invaded, and that the land of Palestine was given over to King Nebuchadnezzar, as it was, in 604 B.C., and 2,520 years from then, the very nation to whom that land was deeded by God Almighty to Abraham and through Abraham, which was not the Jewish people, but that birthright, which means right of birth, and which means the possession of the land, that is, it includes material resources and possessions, and the possession of the land that God promised to Abraham, was handed on down to Isaac, Abraham's son, his first legitimate son, and then to Jacob. And then Jacob, just before he died, and while his eyes were so dim with age that he couldn't see, reached out and conferred that same birthright, including the possession of the land of Palestine, not upon Judah, the father of the Jews, but upon Ephraim, and together with him his brother Manasseh, the sons of Joseph. Joseph was one of the 12 sons of ancient Israel. But usually you don't hear of any tribe of Joseph, because Joseph was given a double portion, and his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, each became a tribe. And so, rather, you usually read of the tribe of Ephraim and the tribe of Manasseh, although the name Joseph is occasionally used, but there it includes the two tribes. Now, Ephraim was made the chief birthright holder, at least was given that title, and 2,520 years from 604 B.C., Ephraim was supposed to go in and take Palestine again from the Gentiles. And it was going to be held and trodden down by the Gentiles for all that time, 2,520 years from 604 B.C., and that brings us to 1917 A.D. Now, when it comes to translating time and getting down to an exact day of the year, when we know the exact day of the year in which Nebuchadnezzar came down to Jerusalem, and when Jerusalem and Palestine was surrendered to him, but that is given to us in the terms of the Hebrew calendar, which is set up according to the new moons. Every 29 and a half days, approximately, is another month. And today we're living under what we call the Roman calendar, or as it was slightly altered by Pope Gregory, it's called today the Gregorian calendar. Actually, it is a pagan Roman calendar, and that's all most of us know, because we've been born in a world that uses that calendar and no other. Now then, a certain date, according to the Hebrew calendar, is not going to come out. It will coincide with a certain date on the Roman calendar one year, but the next year they're going to be maybe 5 or 10 or maybe even 20 or 28 days apart, because the Hebrew calendar, sometimes called the sacred calendar, which came from God, going according to the moon, comes around in conjunction once in 19 years, and it runs in 19-year cycles, whereas the Roman calendar was concocted by men who tried to make it come out right every year, and they've never been able to make it do that. So when it comes to translating a certain date in the Hebrew calendar back in 604 B.C. to a date in 1917 according to the Roman calendar, that takes a lot of figuring. I spent quite a lot of time figuring it, and I came out on the date of December the 9th, 1917, which is the exact date to the very day from the time that Nebuchadnezzar accepted the surrender of the Jews in 604 B.C. Now I looked and I found that the church, who are Gentiles, even though they too are descended from Abraham, nevertheless they're not descended through Isaac and through Jacob, and therefore they are Gentiles. They are descended from Esau. And even though Esau should have had the birthright, he sold it for a bowl of red soup when he was hungry. That mess of pottage, that was red soup. His descendants are called Gentiles, and they are the Turkish people of today, and they possessed Palestine in 1917. But they surrendered it on what date? I had heard, and it had been published, that the date was December the 11th, 1917. December the 11th, 1917, I found on further investigation, was merely the date on which General Allenby and his army made their triumphal march into the city of Jerusalem, but it was 2 days before that, on December the 9th, that the Turks made the surrender. My friends, that prophecy was fulfilled down to the very day, December the 9th, and it was on the equivalent date, which would have been December the 9th in 604 B.C., 2,520 years before, 6 centuries before Christ, that the Jews surrendered Jerusalem and Palestine to the Gentiles from up at Babylon. God Almighty has been able to keep his prophecies. You turn to the 11th chapter of the book of Daniel. There is the longest and the most amazing prophecy in some respects in all the Bible. It takes a long time to go through that and expound it all. There is only one history that I know of that shows the events of that time in detail. That's Rawlinson's Ancient History. It's rather hard to obtain a copy of it today. We have managed to obtain enough copies to be adequate for our library here in Ambassador College. Let me just read you a little of it. I'm not going to go into it, but this is most interesting. Let me just read you a little of it. The 10th, 11th, and 12th chapters of Daniel are one long prophecy, the longest prophecy in the Bible. And actually, the stage setting, the introduction of it is in the 10th chapter. And it is Gabriel, the archangel, speaking to Daniel, and the thought is continued from the 10th into the 11th chapter. Men divided these chapters, God didn't. So here it is. He is saying that I, in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and to strengthen him, and now I will show thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia. Now there were 3 outstanding kings. Actually, there were, history records more kings than that in Persia, but there were only 3 that were outstanding. And in this prophecy, they take note only of the great kings, or the outstanding ones. And the 4th shall be far richer than they all, and by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up the realm of Greece, or Grecia, as it is mentioned here. Now here's what I want you to realize, my friends. This was written back about 580 B.C. or thereabouts. It was written almost 600 years before Christ. There is no doubt whatsoever about that. And the Jewish race have preserved this book of Daniel from that time down till now. Now this is foretelling events that were to happen in the immediate future, beginning from there, the next few kings, and carrying on. And the most amazing thing is the way these things happened. Let me just read you a little more. And a mighty king shall stand up, and that shall rule with great dominion, and do according to his will. That happened. Now, if I had the Rawlinson history here, I would show you just what king that is, and it happened exactly as this prophecy said before it happened. It would happen. No one but God Almighty can foretell what is going to happen in the future. And when he shall stand up, this king, his kingdom shall be broken and shall be divided toward the 4 winds of heaven. It was Alexander the Great. And his kingdom he was broken as a young man. He died in a drunken debauchery. And his kingdom 10 years later was divided by his 4 generals. Not to his posterity, nor according to his dominion which he ruled. In other words, his dynasty would not continue. He had an illegitimate son, but he had no legitimate sons, and no heir of Alexander's, called Alexander the Great, no heir of his ever took over the throne. And for 10 years it was in a turmoil, and then his 4 generals divided the kingdom up among themselves. For his kingdom shall be plucked up even for others beside those, that is, beside his sons. Now, verse 5, and the king of the south. Now you have to know what the king of the north and the king of the south is, and it's speaking from the point of view of Jerusalem. Listen, the Bible is the book of Israel. It's about Israel, and it concerns other nations only as they come in contact with Israel or with Jerusalem or Palestine. It concerns Jerusalem and Palestine geographically. It concerns Israel racially and nationally, and other nations